All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Discovering New Dragons. Join us as we delve into what may become your new favorite RPG. Today, I'm trying an experiment. In general, my goal with discovering new dragons is literally to do that, to show off different RPG systems that you probably haven't heard of or maybe just aren't super familiar with. Just again, with the point of introducing people to new things that they could have fun with. However, the recent Power Rangers stuff and Essence 20 stuff in general has been really, really popular. I have had at least one request that I can remember of me doing a crossover character using the new Essence 20 book that came out that shows how you kind of blend Transformers and G.I. Joe and Power Rangers characters. And so in order to do that, though, at least in this series, I would want to cover how each one of the different Essence 20 based games works. Normally, I wouldn't do them all at the same time. I like to kind of space it out and do different things every single Discovering New Dragons, something that's radically different from the last, as opposed to covering, like, I did the Cypher system, eventually I want to do the Strange, and I thought about doing the Cypher system, then the Strange, and then Numenera all after, and I thought you guys might get some burnout, but Essence 20 stuff is the most popular stuff I put on this channel. You guys seem really primed for it, so we're going to try an experiment. Today, we're going to be going over the Transformers role-playing game. I know I'm technically doing them out of order from when they released, but I think the Transformers is the most different from Power Rangers, and so it gives me the easiest kind of comparison to make. And then G.I. Joe really does feel kind of like a hybrid between the two, and so doing them in that specific order I think makes the most sense. We're going to see if you guys are into this. I know it's been a little bit of time since I released because of all the stuff going on at home. We're going to try this one first, and then I'm going to do my 3 designing new Dragons characters for Transformers, and then if you guys are still into this stuff, we will go to G.I. Joe and then do that, and then after that I will just have 4 episodes, we won't do a Discovering New Dragons on it, where all I do is make crossover characters, and we'll see how it goes. If this isn't super popular, if you guys get burnout from this, then I will probably just do something different, and I will come back to G.I. Joe and eventually doing crossover characters as well. But right now, I like to strike when the iron is hot. So that being said, let's talk about some Transformers. I gotta rearrange some stuff on my screens here so I can actually see what I'm doing. So, moving on. First, let's talk about some history. So, due to the fact that I was hyper-focused on Power Rangers, when the announcement that there was going to be a Power Rangers D&D 5e supplement, that was all I focused on, and I didn't realize that Renegade Studios had also mentioned that they were going to be doing a number of Hasbro-owned properties, including G.I. Joe and Transformers. So the history of the Transformers role-playing game is actually remarkably similar to the Power Rangers role-playing game. They basically all started at the same time, and they all started as D&D 5th edition supplements that eventually turned into the Essence 20 system. Now, as far as role-playing games go, for Transformers specifically, I haven't been able to find another Transformers-themed role-playing game. Role-playing games technically have existed since the 70s when D&D first came out. And surprisingly enough, by as early as the 80s, you already had a bunch of specialized RPGs starting to come out. None of them would be anywhere near as popular or recognizable as D&D. But then when we get into the 90s and the rise of like White Wolf and other things like Shadow... Oh, what's it called? Shadowrun? There we go. Tabletop RPG systems started becoming very plentiful. And you started seeing big name brands have RPG systems. There was I think in the early 2000s, there was a Star Wars, an officially licensed Star Wars RPG that actually used the D20 system from D&D 3rd Edition. There's been lots and lots and lots of them. But as far as I can tell, and this may just be the fact that if you type Transformers RPG into Google, everything that comes up is the new Transformers role-playing game. It might just be that there wasn't any before that. But as far as the history of the Transformers role-playing game, like I said, it followed basically the same kind of growth and genesis that the Power Rangers RPG did, where it initially started as a D&D 5th edition product and then eventually started turning into its own system. And according to the game designers, they did it because it just would fit better in its own system. And to be blunt, they're right. Again, I modify D&D 5th edition constantly. I had a parody, or I still have a parody campaign that I run every so often. It's been a few years since I've done it, but in that parody 5e campaign, I have turned the players into Power Rangers 2 different times using D&D 5th edition. I've turned them into the Avengers. I've done high school drama. Like, I've done a little bit of everything with it. D&D 5th edition is remarkably robust for just kind of modifying and changing it, because the core aspects of it really are not that hard to mess around with. However, it does lend itself very... it lends itself to a very specific style of gameplay. Combat tends to be one of the more fleshed out aspects of it because it's the most complicated, and therefore a lot of people assume that in order to play D&D you have to have combat. A lot of class abilities are focused around combat and things like that, and that's not entirely true, but it's also not entirely false. It also lends itself very, very heavily into a magic style system. What I mean by that is D&D, especially D&D 5th edition, revolves around the idea of magic. A lot, I think every single class has at least one magical subclass, including things like the Barbarian, which you wouldn't think would have a magic subclass, but there's a wild magic Barbarian. I have someone that plays in one of my adventures, or in one of my campaigns, and it's a really cool class. But because 5th edition is so intrinsically involved in magic, and you can reskin it all you want, if you don't include some sort of magic system, or some sort of system where there is a class or a grouping of classes that can do extraordinary physics-breaking things in some way, shape, or form, D&D 5th edition is going to cause some issues for you. And Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Power Rangers, yes, they do some crazy things. You know, Power Rangers can jump, up 30-foot, 100-foot buildings and land on top and be fine. And, they do all these crazy things and they morph in that. But as far as having an entire system to do extremely extraordinary things like throwing fireballs and calling down ice storms and things like that, just doesn't really fit in Power Rangers. The same can be said to Transformers, even more so, because other than the fact that the Transformers are robots, there's not really that much fantastical aspects of Transformers. They are a little bit more grounded. They're a little bit more reliant on science and limitations And then if you go G.I. Joe, they are, again, a fantastical version of a military group, but they are still a military group. And the things that they do need to have its kind of ground in realism, extraordinary, fantastical realism, but still rooted in realism. And D&D just really doesn't do that. And then for Transformers specifically, the fact that the big thing about Transformers is that they transform, the only real transformation mechanics in D&D are your wild shapes for druids and then polymorph. And creating an entire game effectively centered around wild shape mechanics just really doesn't sound fun. Wild shape in and of itself is not particularly well designed for any use outside of playing a druid. It works very, very well for being a druid, but reskinning it as Transformers changing into a vehicle mode or a beast mode, just it doesn't work for that. So to me, it makes perfect sense that they decided to go with their own system. And I've said this many times before. The system itself is really, really solid. It's rules light enough that you really can create whatever character that you want, but there's enough complexity in there that it allows you to create really unique, interesting style characters without having to effectively make up your own rules. And I like that about it. I think that's one of the huge strengths for it. The actual game itself, the PDF came out on August 2nd of last year, and the actual book came out in October. So this game is quite literally less than a year old. And for me personally, I've mentioned many times before, the Power Rangers RPG core book feels almost like a playtest. It feels unfinished. Not that the game itself is unfinished. You have a complete game there. But because they were still learning everything and it was their first publication, it just didn't feel done. It was missing a few things. One, it was missing an explanation on how to read the threat sheets. There weren't enough threats to be able to play the game the way it was designed. And everything felt just a little bit off. It wasn't explained very well. G.I. Joe fixed a lot of the problems from the first book, but I have to say the Transformers book is the one where it finally felt like a fully fleshed out system. And again, that's not to say that it wasn't fully fleshed out before, it just didn't feel that way. It felt raw. The Transformers core book definitely does not feel raw. It feels really good to read. It's very easy to understand. Again, my biggest issue with it is it doesn't explain how the system works before running you through character creation, which means in order to actually build a character, you have to read the 6th chapter and then go backwards to chapters 2 through 5 in order to do it. But other than that, it's a good book. And yeah, that's effectively the history of the game. Moving on. Let's talk about lore. Transformers originally was created to sell children's toys. It was an extremely common thing in the 80s to create cartoons to basically be half an hour long advertisements, or actually closer to 23-minute long advertisements for toys. And as crazy as it sounds, and that's what Power Rangers was too. Power Rangers was a 23-minute long advertisement for toys. And crazy as it sounds, cartoons, at least in the 80s, that were made to sell toys didn't actually make any money. They generally cost more to produce than they were ever going to make. However, the amount of money they made off the toys more than paid for the cost for more than paid for the cost for the cartoon. So because of that, the early kind of lore for Transformers was a little bit loose. But as it became more popular and you started having things like comics and other things growing up, the lore started to grow exponentially. And now there's actual multiple continuities in the Transformers universe. generally being tied to a new series and things like that. Like you have what's called the G1, which is called which refers to Generation 1, which is the original Transformers cartoon, and it generally also refers to the original Transformers comics, despite the fact that there are some differences between them. And the G1 continuity actually continues all the way through Beast Wars and Beast Machines. They all technically happen in the same universe. This particular RPG isn't technically tied to a specific continuity, but it is most heavily influenced by the G1 continuity. And you see that in the character sheets that they decide to put in here. The different roles and everything mimic members of the original G1 stuff. They do have references to other franchises, like I think it was Transformers Prime that introduced the Minicons. Minicons are a part of this. So the thing with the Transformers RPG as far as the lore is concerned is it technically is its own continuity, but it's going to be most familiar to people that are familiar with the G1 continuity, which is the original Optimus Prime versus Megatron, and Starscream being the insane backstabber that he is, and Jazz and Bumblebee and all those guys. That's what's going to feel the most familiar. As far as the lore contained in the book, I mentioned this in my in-depth review of this. The lore that's in the book is done in this really, really well-written, basically journal entry style things, where you have, I believe it's Optimus Prime, is narrating the war between the Decepticons and the Autobots that eventually gets taken to Earth, which is where this is set. There's really nothing about Cybertron as far as how to play on Cybertron or anything. Everything is really supposed to happen on Earth, which again, G1 continuity. And every so often you'll have things like transcript of an interview with Jetfire, where you get you have all these different ways that they give you the lore of the Transformers, and it's really well done. It's got great artwork and stuff like that. And so when you are playing this, you're going to be playing your own Autobot. They do have character sheets created for certain famous Autobots, but they're actually not created in a character sheet form. They're actually created in the same form that you would see a threat. So they're not really designed to be played by the players. They're meant to kind of help out the players. And they do have data files on a ton of different Autobots that can basically show up as allies and things like that. But you as a player, you're going to be creating your own Autobot. They're going to be a part of this war, and you're going to have your own Autobot to the team, which is going to be really fun. And you get to kind of join into this war between the Autobots and the Decepticons, which I think is the most fun about this. There were a few complaints at first of people saying, well, what if I wanted to play Optimus Prime? Why don't they have a stat block for Optimus Prime? Well, because that's not the point of playing the Transformers RPG any more than the point of playing Dungeons and Dragons is not to be able to play as Drizzt and the other companions of the hall. To be blunt, I don't think Wizards of the Coast or Ari Salvatore has ever actually released full official character sheets for any of their most famous ones. They have mentioned, how many levels of what class they might have or things like that. And there might have been every so often a promotional character sheet or something, but it's never, D&D has never been designed for you to basically play as characters somebody else wrote. And the same thing is true about Transformers. It's not meant to be you playing as your favorite Autobot. It's meant to be you playing as your personal Autobot that you created. So yeah, lore-wise, it's extensive. And again, because technically the lore that shows up in the book is its kind of own lore, You can just go on what's in the books, but you really can modify this to play in any continuity of Transformers. And because there's so much lore that exists because of the comics, because of the multiple television series, I would never be able to talk about all the different lore. But the basics of it are Autobots are the good guys, Decepticons are the bad guys. And in this particular instance, you are fighting on Earth over Energon. So yeah, moving on. Let's talk about dice rolls and mechanics. Just like the other Essence 20 systems, this uses Essence 20, and that means everything is based on the 4 S's. The 4 S's are basically your 4 attributes, which is different from a lot of RPGs that are based on D&D, which is the vast majority of RPGs on the market right now has something to do with that. They generally tend to have 6. You have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, or something similar to those. In general, most games will change at least a few of those words to avoid having to deal with copyright nonsense and trademarking nonsense. But the Essence 20 system doesn't do that. They have 4. They have strength, speed, smarts, and socials. And it's one of my favorite things about this is just how everything is themed really well, because you don't have to actually, the essence S is part of the name in Essence, and so they didn't actually have to call it the 4 S's, but they did, and they have everything just kind of fits into this nice theming box, which is hard to do, to be blunt. So that's always nice. But the SS20 system, if you've seen any of my other videos on the SS20 system, it's the exact same system with some modifications because Transformers don't work like Power Rangers. But the core of the system, you have a strength score, a speed score, a smart score, a social score. You have a bunch of skills. Each skill is under one of those S's. And then the more ranks you have in a particular skill, the larger the skill die you roll. All of your rolls are a d20 plus your skill die. And depending on how many ranks you have, your skill die starts as a d2, which is a coin flip. And it eventually will go up to a d4, d6, d8, and keep going up. In addition to that, you have 2 things that can modify rolls on the fly. They are edge and snag, which is effectively your advantage-disadvantage system from D&D 5th edition. You roll your d20 twice, and on an edge, you take the higher of the 2 rolls. On a snag, you take the lower of the 2 rolls. And then you also have upshifts and downshifts, which is basically the skill die itself. If you get an upshift, you roll the next die up. And you can actually, if you get enough upshifts and have a high enough number of points invested in that skill, you can eventually get up to rolling multiple skill dice, all the way up to automatic successes and automatic critical successes. And the same thing is true about downshifts, as you roll the next one down. And you can eventually get to auto fails and auto crit fails and things like that. So, that being said, the actual mechanics of the game are pretty straightforward. Everything you're going to do is going to be a skill test. Even attack rolls and things like that. There are things like finesse is a skill under the speed the speed essence. And that is used for any kind of speed-based attacks. Might is the strength version of that. Both of those can be used for punches and kicks, which is really common in Power Rangers. But as far as Transformers, you're going to be using targeting, which is another, which is actually, I believe, targeting is a smarts-based skill. Before I say the wrong thing, targeting. No, targeting is a speed-based. Technology is a smarts-based. So in Transformers, your attacks are going to involve a little bit more targeting. Not because they don't have melee weapons and stuff like that in there. They do. I mean, Optimus Prime in the movies actually uses a big old sword, and there are quite a few Autobots and Decepticons that have some sort of melee weapon built in. They have full rules for melee weapons in here, but Transformers just involves a lot of really cool guns and stuff like that. So targeting tends to be a little bit more common a trait than, say, in Power Rangers, where unless you're morphed, generally you are just using martial arts and punches and kicks and stuff like that. And even when you are morphed, a lot of the Power Rangers weapons are melee weapons. And if we look at just the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Red Ranger has a sword, Blue Ranger has a lance, a double-sided lance, but a lance nonetheless. Yellow Ranger has daggers, Black Ranger has an axe that can turn into a gun, and then the Pink Ranger has a bow. So, and then if we bring in the Green Ranger, he has a dagger. So they are all very much martial based and melee based. It's just not quite as true with Transformers. You will be using targeting a little bit more when you're doing that. The other thing that makes Transformers unique from a mechanical standpoint is your origins are very, very different. And the reason I say that is your origin is effectively your race if you want to compare it to D&D and a lot of other RPGs. But the big thing about your origin is your origin gives you your alt mode, which is could be your vehicle mode. But if you were playing a Beast Wars style campaign, that would be your beast mode. And a lot of other things. It's basically your not robot mode. And that's probably the biggest difference in playing and running this game is the fact that every single single Transformers character can transform between these two roles, and they massively change how you play the game. The fact that you could turn into, a plane and then fly really fast means combat's going to be a little bit different, because you can make the field significantly bigger and not run into issues of melee characters not being able to do what they will want because people are just too far away. It also means three-dimensional combat can be significantly easier for players to deal with, simply because if you have flyers, that means they are going to have an advantage that ground-based characters simply aren't going to have. And if you have water adds a completely different style of 3D combat, where anyone with an aquatic alt form is going to have a major advantage over non-aquatic alt forms. And so it really means, as a player, you can kind of specialize your character in, okay, well, in certain environments, I am going to be massively useful. And in other environments, I'm not going to be anywhere near as useful, and I'm going to be much more limited to staying in my bot form. And it also means that even if you're in an environment that heavily favors, let's say you're underwater and you don't have an underwater alt mode, when you're bot mode, you're still going to be able to operate and do things, just not quite as well as someone with an alt mode that gives them a swim speed. And I think that's probably the most fun part, and the most interesting mechanic, is just really understanding your alt mode and how it works with everything else, and your role and how it interacts with your alt mode. I think all those things are really, really fun. The other kind of mechanical change for Transformers over Power Rangers is again kind of... Power Rangers is kind of a what I call skill-based RPG masquerading as a class-based. Skill-based does not mean you have to have skill to be able to play it. What I mean by skill-based is that in general, a skill-based RPG is not going to have a specific class. You build your own class by adding particular skills to your character. Power Rangers RPG has roles which functionally work as classes, but so much of the customization of your character is going to come through your perks, of which there are 3 different types of perks in in the Power Rangers RPG. You have general perks, you have Zord perks, and then you have what are called grid powers. So that's very skill based. If we go to Transformers, it is much more akin to a traditional class-based RPG where you have your classes. They're going to give most of your definition of your character. And then you also have subclasses in the idea of a focus. Each role comes with two foci that you can choose between, and they massively change how the class runs, and they are chosen at level 1. So unlike something like D&D 5th edition, where depending on your class you will choose your subclass anywhere from right at level 1 for things like sorcerers, all the way up to level 3 for classes like fighters, or druids or anything like that. Though druids have it at level 2. How about paladins get it at level 3? So this one, every single role gets their focus right at level 1, and it actually is one of the things that gives you one of your essence score improvements is directly from your subclass. So the subclasses are different a month and enough that they actually give you different bonuses to your essence scores. And I think that's a real it's a real strength for the system itself. I like, in a class-based system, I like subclasses. I want people to be able to play multiple versions of the same class and still feel unique and special. And you can do that in D&D 5th edition. You can't do that in the Power Rangers RPG, but you can definitely do that in the Transformers RPG. So, yeah, since we've already talked about it, let's move on to character creation. So for character creation, like I said, this works just like the Power Rangers RPG or really any other Essence 20 system. You start by... I'm going to actually go through the process here just to make sure I'm not doing it wrong. So in this one, they have you select your influences first, then go to your origin, and then finally pick your role. If you remember from the Power Rangers RPG, they did things a little bit different where you started with your origin, then your role, and then chose your influences last. I don't think either way is better or worse. They just kind of show a different mindset in how you build your character. And you 100% don't have to follow that order. You can start with your role, then choose your origin, then choose your influence. But like I said in the other chapter, the big thing that's going to make this feel different is, yes, everyone always thinks about their class. In most class-based RPGs, class is the most important thing. In Essence 20, your influence, your origin, and your role are all equally important in creating your character. So you're going to spend more time picking your role or picking your origin than you would ever do picking your race in D&D. Just because you have to go, okay, well, if I choose this origin, then I'm going to be really big. Because not only does it give you your alt form, it gives you the size of your alt form. And the abilities that are built into your origin are going to go off of that size. So having having a little bit of extra emphasis put on your origin and really figuring out what you want to do is going to be beneficial for you, because a field commander that takes the cutter origin is going to play very, very different than a field commander that takes the seeker origin. Probably because the seeker origin, you get a flying alt form. So you get a plane or something like that as your alt form, and that's a really, really big difference than the cutter, where you are effectively, if I remember correctly, the cutter is like a hot rod. Oh no, the cutter is water based. So again, definitely big difference. So yeah, as far as other things involving character creation in and of itself. Again, they recommend that you start with your influences, and the influences that are built into the book are 100% designed for Transformers, to the point where using them in Power Rangers starts becoming a little bit weird for some of them. Like, one of the influences you have is called the Gladiator. Gladiatorial rings, not really a big thing on Earth right now. They used to be, not anymore. Unless you reskin Gladiator as something like UFC fighter, or boxer, or something like that, where you have a combat sport that technically works. But again, you rarely are going to call it a gladiator unless you live in the 90s and happen to have a name like Spazer. If anyone has no idea what I'm referencing there, just look up American Gladiators and be prepared to be... I don't really know what you should feel about it. I don't even know what I feel about it, but it was a thing in the 90s, and it was really popular for a little while. And no one can tell me why. So anyway, yeah. The other thing that's unique about Essence 20 in general, you can actually choose multiple influences, and your first one doesn't really have a detriment to it, but for each influence after that, you get a hang-up. And one of the unique things about the Transformers is, instead of, like in Power Rangers, each influence has an associated hang-up. In Transformers, you will have a perk built into your influence, but then you have what are called potential hang-ups. And so for the Gladiator, your 3 potential hang-ups are impulsive, vainglorious, or violent. What that means is, if you choose a second influence, because there are multiple hang-ups that you have that little bit extra ability to customize your character, in the idea that you actually get to have some choice as far as what kind of hang-up you're going to have. And I've said this many, many times before. The best part of most characters is going to be their flaws. They're the most interesting part. They're the thing that makes it the most fun. So I always recommend at least pick 2 influences in any Essence 20 game, so that you get at least 1 hang-up, because that's what's going to make your character really fun to play. And then, yeah, like I said, the roles are the roles. They are really well designed. Each focus feels unique enough that, again, you can have 2 people playing the same role but different focuses, and still feel unique enough that they're their own character, especially if they choose different origins and influences and things like that. They still feel very, very unique characters. And they do have specific roles that are designed to take advantage of the specific aspects of the Transformers RPG that are unique to it. The Mode Master role actually has a focus that either turns you into a pet class, effectively. Well, it gives you some mini cons to deal with, or you can turn it into a triple changer, which basically gives you an additional alternate mode. And that's something I think Essence 20 tends to lean into a lot, is when each game has something very specific to it, they will also add in things that will only work in that version of Essence 20, because it links itself and kind of grabs onto one of the unique aspects of that. And alt modes and transformation is unique to Transformers. And so the Mode Master is almost a uniquely Transformers role that isn't going to scale anywhere near as well as some of the other ones, even with the new faction rules. So, yeah. Moving on. Let's talk about monsters. So I mentioned before, I'm going to be comparing this a lot to Power Rangers because it was the first one, and I've already talked about Power Rangers in this series. But one of the issues with the Power Rangers RPG was the the threat section was just not nearly large enough. Power Rangers is built around what's called. Thank you, phone. Power Rangers is what's called a Monster of the Week style adventure, where each week a new episode comes out. You would have a new monster that they had to deal with, and because of that, you need a pretty large rogues gallery. You need a large amount of enemies because each, probably not each session, but each 3 or 4 sessions that makes up a single episode of your Power Rangers game, you need a new monster to be able to fight. And a single season of Power Rangers, they will generally go through anywhere between like the upper 30s to low 50s as far as monsters. And there weren't even that many monsters in there. Transformers, on the other hand, is much more kind of rogues gallery style enemies, kind of akin to superhero books, where you will have your enemies that just keep coming back over and over again. So you don't need anywhere near as many variable threats, because a lot of times at the end of combat they're going to try and run away or something like that. Like, you're not just killing them every single to the time you interact with them. And so because of that, you first of all don't need as many threats in order to be able to play Transformers as you would if you wanted to play Power Rangers. There's also the fact that these threats are going to feel more three-dimensional because they are repeated threats. They need to have a little bit more than, oh, this is a bad guy and this is where the bad guy comes from. No, they need to have motivations, and they need to have things that they do in relationships with the other Decepticons, and they do outline that pretty well in here. Most of the threats will have a full page bit of art. They will have a little description of what they are, and then they have a full page for their actual threat sheet, which will have a little bit more of stuff in there to kind of figure out how to run them and how to play them. And there's also the fact that a lot of these characters have existed for decades. And so if you want to play them more realistically, or just want more motivation for them, it's not difficult to get that. You simply have to look up what they did in the comics or what happened in the television shows that they existed in. So that's always a lot more fun. However, the threats themselves are the same threats that you're going to see. Like, they look identical to the threats you're going to see in G.I. Joe, the threats you're going to see in Power Rangers. Aside from the fact that these guys can transform, which is very, very useful. Taking threats from other books is not that difficult at all. And for the most part, if you want to create a new Decepticon by reskinning a Power Rangers monster, you generally can do that without too much difficulty. The biggest thing you generally need to do is change their size and probably add an alt mode to make them feel a little bit more like a Transformers threat. And they do also have kind of generic Decepticons that you can fight, and they also have little kind of robots and defense probes and the things like that, so that you're not always fighting people that are going to run away at the end. You do get to take out and conquer kind of generic bad guys as well, but things like Cyclonus or Dead End or anything like that are going to feel... your players and as players, you're going to develop little vendettas against certain Decepticons, and it can be a character by character basis. Like, it may be one member of your team just happened to be a flying type Transformer, gets into a scuffle with Starscream, and Starscream takes it personally, and so for the rest of your campaign, Starscream particularly likes to attack that particular one, and they have the little rivalry. That's something that Transformers does really, really well that I don't think happens anywhere near as well in Power Rangers. Power Rangers, you deal with a monster and then it's done. The most you're going to do is you might have like a Goldar or a Scorpina that shows up on a regular basis, but that's not really how the system's designed. This one, it's definitely designed for that conflict and stuff like that. So yeah, moving on. Let's talk about equipment and items. I've mentioned every single time I've talked about Essence 20, your equipment is significantly more impactful on how you play your character than other RPGs. And it was something I wasn't expecting. I ran a Power Rangers RPG like mini campaign, and I have run a few Essence 21 shots. And I didn't realize just how much a different weapon was going to change how the character played. In addition to its class, in addition to its origin, it's almost a fourth piece of your character. And Transformers is unique in the idea of hard points. Hard points specifically are where you hold your weapons. External hard points are like everything else in any other RPG. They're effectively your hands. Anything you put in an external hardpoint is something that you hold. But you also have what are called integrated hardpoints, which are weapons that are literally integrated into your transformer. So maybe your transformer has a shoulder-mounted cannon. Or maybe your transformer has little Gatling guns attached to its arms that it fires. Because these are integrated, that means that when you are in your alt form, you can use these weapons. And you actually get to choose in your alt form if these weapons are hidden, meaning you have to actually use a free action to bring them out, or if they always show up there, and that's going to change how people react to your alt form. A lot of times, because Transformers is robots in disguise, a lot of times the reason that they use their alt form is so they can go around without being, outed as a giant robot. And if in your alt mode you just happen to have Gatling guns stuck to the top of your Camaro, people are going to know something's up, because Gatling guns is not a standard part of a Camaro. You have to get that. You have to pay extra for that. So yeah, I mean, the equipment and the integrated versus external hardpoint system makes Transformers extremely unique, and it makes your equipment choices that much more important for building your character, because your integrated hardpoints are going to be a major part of how your character plays in both modes. Whereas the external hardpoints are really only going to be useful for you when you are in your bot mode. I've even gone as far as the integrated hardpoints on one of the Transformers characters I created for a Realms of the Wild one shot. Actually was daggers, and I turned their wings into blades so that they could basically fly by and cut people when they were in their alt form. And again, that was just something I thought was really interesting and fun that I really couldn't do in any other system. If you have a mode that's meant for mobility, you're generally not going to be able to turn that mobility into an offensive weapon in a lot of different RPGs, including D&D. So, yeah, equipment, super important in Essence to the 20, and even more so in the Transformers RPG because of the integrated hard points and just how interesting that can be for your character. In addition to the fact that you can upgrade all of your weapons, and they have this really robust upgrade system built into this so that you can have these really extremely unique weapons that each damage type will have different things that it does. Like laser damage will do laser type damage, but any weapon or any gun that does laser type damage also has the ability to paint the target, which makes it easier for other people to hit it. fire type damage can set people on fire, if I remember correctly. So each different type of damage can change how your character plays drastically just by changing the damage type. So yeah, overall equipment and items, really, really important, really, really cool, and the integrated part of them makes Transformers a fun adventure. Moving on. Let's talk about GMing the Game. Essence 20 in general, I've mentioned this before, Essence 20 is a negotiation style GMing. And what I mean by that is a lot of times you are going to ask for a roll, and the roll itself and what skills are supposed to be used for it can be up to interpretation, especially once you start dealing with specializations. There is a finite list of skills in the Essence 20 system. They list all of the skills in it, and all of them show up on your character sheet. Whether or not you have any any training in any of them is entirely up to you. But the list of skills is actually written out. However, specializations are completely arbitrary. They have suggested specializations, but you can specialize in literally anything. And because of that, during the GMing process, when the GM asks for a roll, it's going to be extremely common for the players to go, hey, can I use this skill and this specialization? Because specialization allows you to basically roll every single skill die you have unlocked and take the highest out of any of those rolled. And it also makes it significantly easier for getting critical hits or critical successes and things like that. So when you're GMing the Essence 20 system in general, you should be open to negotiations, especially since you also have the edge and snag mechanic and the upshift and downshift mechanic, as well as the ability to award story points, which is another entire thing that can be used to change outcomes and get benefits for the players and the GM. As the GM, you have your own pool of story points that you can use for your NPCs, either NPCs to help the party or adversaries that are going to attack the party. All of them can use your story points. So very, very useful and fun for that. So because of that, you want to go into every encounter, and not just combat encounter, but anytime a roll is being made, you want to go into it with the idea that you are going to be kind of bargaining and negotiating with your players to see what they're going to roll. And that doesn't mean that every single roll has to be a 20-minute long conversation. But if you go into it with the idea that the players are going to ask questions and say, hey, can I use this instead? It's going to go much, much faster, especially if the players are expecting that. So as soon as you go, hey, the player goes, I'd like to do this. Okay, make me this roll. And they go, well, can I make it this roll and use this specialization? That really should be all the negotiation that needs to happen. But that should happen very regularly. In addition to that, because of the alt modes in Transformers specifically, your arenas, whether they're going to be for combat, whether they're going to be for exploration, anything like that, you should make them larger than you're used to for other RPGs if you do run other RPGs. D&D, the entirety of a battlefield, if it is wider and longer than about 60 feet, you're generally never going to use probably about 75% of it. Most of combat is going to take place in about a 30 by 30 foot square in D&D. Just in general, that's how it works. And most other RPGs, that tends to ring true. Between 30 and 60 feet is generally all you're going to need on a map. And 60 feet is a very large arena to fight in. A lot of combat in D&D takes place in like 20 by 20 rooms. Transformers, because first of all, they are already larger than humans, and second of all, because they have alt modes that can let them move significantly faster than humans would ever be. You can create very large arenas, and you really should, to give them an incentive to use their alt mode. Transforming into your alt mode takes a major action, I think it's called, or whatever the skill is called. I know they have free actions because I've never enjoyed that, but anyway, so it takes your action effectively. I can't remember off the top of my head what the specific action is called. I'm looking it up right now. I have the book in front of me. So types of action. Standard, that's what it's called. Standard action, move action, and free action. So it does take your standard action to transform. So in a turn that you transform, you're going to have to sacrifice your action in order to do that. But again, if you give them incentives for, well, yeah, you can stand back and take pot shots, but if you want to do this, you're going to want to transform. And every Autobot has an ability called Roll Out, where as they roll initiative, they can just instantly go into their alternate form. That gives a lot of choice to the players of, okay, do I want to immediately go into my alt form? We're on this big 400 by 400 foot area. In my bot mode, I'm not going to be able to get anywhere near close enough, so I'm going to go to my alt mode and be able to do this. And because of the integrated weapons we already talked about, you're not defenseless in your bot mode. It just plays a little bit differently. So yeah, as a GM, you want to be aware that even if you're playing Theater of the Mind, you need to add a little bit more distance to everything. Everything is bigger in Transformers. All the Transformers are kind of building height as opposed to, human being height. And because of that, you need to make everything a little bit bigger. Battlefield should be, instead of the area right outside a shop, it should be a full city block or something like that. Or maybe the combat itself takes place in downtown, which is like 5 or 10 blocks of this city. Make it big. Give them a reason to use their alt forms. Otherwise, the alt forms are going to feel mostly useless. Beyond that, it's your standard Essence to 20 game. The other thing that Transformers is kind of built around is what I call a missions-based RPG, where you effectively, at the beginning of a group of sessions, which I would classify as an episode, you're going to be starting at home base or something like that. You're going to be given a mission, and then you have to go. Unlike something like DnD, where it can be a little bit more free form and just kind of wandering around, Transformers is built on the idea that you belong to a group, there is a chain of command, and you're going to be given specific things to do. It doesn't mean that you cannot play a Transformers game where they have somehow been cut off from the rest of the Autobots and they have to kind of find their way on their own and do a lot of exploration and things like that. It's definitely possible, but the game kind of assumes that you're going to have a mission-based structure. So that's something you should be aware of as well when GMing the game. But otherwise, it's a phenomenal system, and I think everyone should give it a try at least once. Moving on. And then the last thing we generally like to talk about is what I call additional resources. Renegade Game Studios has been great at supporting their products pretty well after launch. For Transformers specifically, they do have what they call their free bonus content, which there will be a link in the description to be able to get that. But what it involves is a little bit of lore, one about how to play Starscream, and one about something that's shown up in a few of the Transformers series called the Hate Plague. They have a specific item called the Polarity Gauntlets, which is basically you get magnet powers with it. And then they have a bunch of character sheets for specific characters, which again look much more like threat blocks for them. And that's really all of the free content. All of it's really nice, really useful. but it's not going to be game breaking or anything. And again, unless you're playing a Decepticon campaign, which requires a decent amount of work to be able to build off of this, because this is designed more for an Autobot style campaign, you're probably not going to be using any of the additional threats against your players unless they're doing like a training exercise or something, and RC and Bumblebee decided to get into the training and hands-on, let's say. But that's always useful. The form-fillable character sheet that I'll be using for the rest of this, for me, came with my pre-order when I got it. It came with the PDF version of it. They don't have anywhere on the website to be able to download the form-fillable Transformers character sheet on its own. I would assume it comes with the PDF version. If it doesn't come with the physical version, I'm certain you can contact Renegade to be able to get it. But again, I bought the physical version. I got the PDF for free. So I think I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% certain on this, and I really don't have any way to check it. But I think if you buy either the book or the PDF directly from Renegade, you will get the form-fillable PDF for free, which I always recommend. Every company has a form-fillable PDF. They are essential for people like me that can't write things down. And anyone that plays online, it's just easier to keep track of character sheets digitally than it is to have them in like a binder or something like that. Beyond that, they do also have an adventure book that is could come out, or hasn't technically come out. The PDF is available. The physical book comes out, I think, May or June, and that's called The Time Is Now. They call it an adventure book, so it's basically a series of episodes, all centered around a theme. And I think it works the same way as Adventures in Angel Grove, where it takes you from like level 2 to like level 5 or 6 or something like that. So it's a decent kind of mini campaign. They also have a smaller adventure called A Beacon of Hope that if you get their GM screen, it comes with a GM screen. Otherwise, you can get it on its own for like $10 if you just want the adventure itself. And then obviously they have the GM screen, and they have a set of Transformers dice and stuff like that. So all stuff that you would suspect to exist. So moving on. Timed that pretty well out of ginger beer. Right when I get to final thoughts. So overall, the Transformers RPG, in my personal opinion, the Transformers RPG core book is the best version of the Essence 20 core books that came out. It feels the most complete. The Transformers system in and of itself is massively fun to play. There's really no other way to say it. It's a really cool system. You get to be a robot in disguise. The integrated hard points, I think, make for even more interesting characters. I'm a big fan of the focus system, where each role has a subclass that I think is really, really fun. And then the alt modes built into your origin just mean that you are going to have so many unique Transformers that you can make in this system compared to literally any other system out there. It is just bonkers how much fun this system is. So anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important in the comments down below. What would your first Transformer be? Do you want to be a leadership like Optimus Prime style character? Maybe a little closer to Ultra Magnus? Do you want to be that kind of cool character like Jazz, or Scout style character like Bumblebee? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, also let me know what your alt form is, because we all have to know what the super cool alt form is going to be. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I'll see you guys the next time, all right? Bye-bye.